It's been 29 days since the federal government entered a shutdown. We're now just a week away from this becoming the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. As the government has ground to a halt, millions of Americans face financial uncertainty, while essential services tied to food assistance, heating, and health care hang in the balance. House Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to call the House back into session. Meanwhile, the Senate seems hopelessly deadlocked. What will it take to reopen the government? Here to give us a rundown of where all of this stands is USA Today Congress reporter Zach Schermele, who joins me now from the Capitol. Zach, as always, it's good to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Zach, let's start with where we are right now. The current shutdown is already the second longest in U.S. history. What's going on at Capitol Hill?
So the Senate just took another failed vote on trying to move forward with a short-term funding extension authored by the GOP. Listen, this has been a shutdown largely like no other in that members of Congress on both sides are extremely dug in on both of their respective positions. And, Democrats are trying to use this as an opportunity to exert what little political leverage they have in Washington these days with Republican control of both the House, Senate, and the White House to try and get several things accomplished, namely on the healthcare front. And we really have not seen much movement from more moderate Democratic senators as the GOP has forced a number of votes, more than a dozen votes on a short-term funding extension that originally, when they started voting on it, would have continued appropriations into November 21st, just before Thanksgiving. Of course, we are getting closer and closer to that date. And so now Republicans are in a bit of a tough position in that they have to sort of consider whether or not they want to alter this measure at all and move the funding deadline back to some degree. That's also all complicated by the fact that the House of Representatives, in another pressure tactic on Democrats, has been out for weeks now, and it's not entirely clear when Republicans and the rest of the House of Representatives is going to be back. House Speaker Mike Johnson said that they're on a 48-hour return notice this morning. But, that's subject to flight delays, in fact, as a result of some of the shortages that have been caused by the shutdown in air traffic controllers.
We've previously discussed how Democrats are trying to make sure Obamacare subsidies remain intact. Is this still the main sticking point?
I would argue it is largely. So the issue is that the Affordable Care Act mandates that a certain number of Americans who are identify as low income or eligible for enhanced premium tax credits, that subsidies essentially that support their ability to purchase insurance on the Obamacare marketplace. And those tax credits, which were enhanced during the pandemic, are set to expire at the end of this year. So Democrats have really latched onto this issue. And in fact, a couple of Republicans as well have latched onto this issue as what they are characterizing as a looming healthcare crisis. They say that millions of Americans are going to see their premiums as much as double. And there is some willingness within the Republican conference on both sides and both chambers to potentially do something about this. But, it's not entirely clear just how far the White House would be willing to allow Republicans in Congress to go to strike some sort of a deal here. And so far, Republicans have largely stuck to their talking points about this particular issue, saying that Democrats want to expand insurance benefits, federal subsidies for countless numbers of undocumented immigrants, which is not an accurate statement, but that's the position that they are sticking to and has created some complications in terms of their ability to all of a sudden come out in support of a deal on Obamacare subsidies.
Zach, we need to talk about how this is affecting everyday Americans. You mentioned air traffic controllers. What else can you tell us here?
Right. I mean, I think that this issue is going to come to a head over the course of the next couple of weeks here. Every day that a shutdown drags on, and this one, we should note, is on track to become the longest as we pass the 35-day mark that was set during the last shutdown in 2019. With every day of a shutdown, the pain becomes more acute for Americans in the form of all sorts of government programs seeing their funding expire and the bandwidth that those government programs have being affected by furloughs. And so air traffic controllers have been working on the job without pay for a significant period of time now. That is leading to disruptions in flights all across the country. I know there are a number of Americans that just don't feel comfortable flying at this point in time. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has assured the public that, that he is not going to allow, and the administration is not going to allow flights to take off unless they are safe. But even lawmakers like Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, have admitted that they themselves are experiencing some form of flight disruption. So as those become more intense, I think we could see the pressure ramp up on lawmakers.
Let's shift to the challenges faced by federal workers, about 700,000 of whom have been furloughed, with nearly as many others having to work without pay. Give us an update on that.
The biggest update is that the American Federation of Government Employees, that's the largest federal workers union, has now come out and said that it wants Democrats and Republicans, mainly Democrats who have refused to budge on these healthcare issues, to pass a funding bill that just continues to keep the government funded at current levels in order to reopen, because they say that the pain that is being felt by federal workers, hundreds of thousands of whom have not seen pay for really notable period of time now, it's just becoming too much for many of them to bear, including the folks who have been subject to what are called reductions in force, or in more simple terms, layoffs here in Washington and around the country. Thousands of federal workers, their jobs are in limbo because the administration has used the shutdown as an opportunity to cull more of the federal workforce, including most notably the Education Department's Special Education Division, which now has only a handful of people in charge of overseeing federal funding for students with disabilities around the country. And so whether or not that starts to factor into lawmakers' calculations, I think we're going to have to see in the coming days.
Zach, as you know, the military is also facing uncertainty around pay. Earlier this month, President Donald Trump signed a memorandum that allowed military members to get paid on the 15th. Where did that money come from, and will they get paid this Friday, October 31st?
Yeah, this has been a source of kind of consternation and I think really a notable and meaningful piece of daylight between congressional Republicans and the White House, because, initially when the president was asked about wanting to get military members paid, he was, very alacritous to get something passed very soon. He said, we want to make sure that we are taking care of our service members and they are not going to bear the brunt of this shutdown. But leaders in Congress and the president's counterparts in the Republican Party, House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune, were more hesitant initially to try and pass, and actually continue to be, to try and pass standalone military pay bills, because they want Democrats to feel the pressure as a result of many of those folks not seeing their paychecks. And there has been some attempt on the part of the White House to try and shift funding around to ensure that military service members get paid. The president said that he accepted a multi-million-dollar donation from a particular individual in order to try and get the troops paid. It's not entirely clear that he has the ability to use that money to fund what has historically been congressionally appropriated money. And, all of these are really examples of Congress sort of ceding its spending authority during this shutdown in a way that has real implications for military families, and to this point has not guaranteed that they're going to see a paycheck.
Another program that's in danger is SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That program runs through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. When might recipients of that benefit start feeling the shutdown?
Right. So federal funding starts to run out as soon as after November 1st for SNAP, also known as food stamp benefits. And, we talked about expiring Obamacare subsidies earlier. And it's important to note that, it's roughly 20 million Americans, a little bit more than that rely on those enhanced premium tax credits made possible through the Affordable Care Act. It's more than 40 million Americans that are reliant on food stamps. And, so you can make the argument that more Americans are being sort of caught up in the implications of the shutdown than initially were going to be affected by some of the demands that Democrats were really digging their heels in on. Although, they would argue that this is also part of trying to push back more broadly on the Trump administration and its efforts to change the ways in which money is appropriated in Washington. But, lots of Americans are going to feel the effect of this. Very prominent hunger advocate said as recently as this week that we could potentially be seeing the largest hunger crisis in America since the Great Depression if more than 40 million Americans are thrown off their food benefits.
Of course, we now know that attorneys general and governors from 25 Democrat-led states have now filed a lawsuit in an attempt to force the Trump administration to fund the nation's largest food aid program. We'll be watching to see what happens there. Zach, what about the almost 74 million who receive Social Security? Are they still getting their checks?
Well, Social Security has been subject to the same sorts of disruptions that I think a lot of government programs have. When you have the lion's share of a federal agency furloughed and, the folks who may be coming in not even getting paid, that disrupts all sorts of government programs. And folks have had real trouble trying to get a hold of people at the Social Security Administration through their customer service programs. And that is affecting all sorts of Americans. And like I say, is not an issue that is necessarily just part of what's happening with respect to Social Security. But, I talk to financial aid administrators, students who have student loans that they have issues with, and they need troubleshot. And it's my understanding that all sorts of Americans are sort of feeling the brunt of those delays in government services.
Finally, Zach, what are you hearing from lawmakers at this point? Does either side seem ready to negotiate to end the shutdown?
I think that the reality of the matter is that we are sort of getting to a turning point in this crisis, right? As SNAP funding starts to expire, as travel starts to be disrupted because we are approaching the Thanksgiving holiday, as more furloughed workers are going without pay, as we pass the record of setting the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. All of that is going to have an impact on whether or not we have a solution at any point in the near future.
Zach, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for carving out time to join us from the Capitol on the Excerpt. It's always good to have you.
Thanks, Dana.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.